Hello. Welcome to another episode of 20 Seconds of Courage. I'm here today with my dear friend Padma, and we're going to talk about some fun stuff. I just want to welcome anyone who's watching for the first time or listening for the first time. If you're live watching, feel free to put comments. If you're watching the replay, put your comments. Feel free to tag us, ask us questions. We love to interact with you. If you're curious as to what 20 Seconds of Courage is about, it started in 2019 when I literally decided I wanted to stop overthinking things and just hit record and go live and see what happens and have real conversations with real people. That's really how this whole thing came about. Um, Part of it was that I was always afraid to ask certain questions, so I would mute myself. And this was an opportunity for me to unmute and just be real. And I feel like we need a lot more real in this world. So I'm really excited to be here for another episode with you. Today, I've got my dear friend Padma. We met about how many months ago? 18 months ago in a group program that we took for our business. And we've been connecting, and I just adore you. And she also looks a little bit like she could be related to me. So there we go. So I want to welcome you, Padma. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. And we've had some amazing conversations that weren't recorded. And so I'm excited to have yet another delightful, delicious conversation.
I agree. There's been many a times when I'm like, gosh, we really should have hit record on this. Like a few times we've had conversations. I'm like, why didn't we record this? So, why don't we start with you in your words? Tell me a little bit about what you do and how you got to be doing that. Just real simple, just so we know who you are.
What do I do? Well, I work one-on-one with people at this point. Um, I am I put embodiment leader, which is so funny, but what I do is I'm a yoga and movement therapist and a body worker. And so I've been trained Rolfing from the most subtle to the most intervening body work and an energy healer. So I kind of love working with bodies, whether it's the energetic that moves to the form, the injury, the movement compromise, whatever it is. So, people come to me because they're impacted in some way. And
Mm,
it's been a journey of supporting. I mean, when I was younger, it was just like, oh, okay. It's like every person came in with a new thing. It wasn't just the ankle or the shoulder, it was the whole person. And so over the years, it's been like how to hold space for people to unfold. And I think that my focus right now at this point feels like there is my kind of yogic background, this desire to really connect the spirit to the body. It's
mm,
like I think I spend a lot of time kind of transcending in yoga classes and trying to seek higher states. And what I'm feeling now is the more kind of feminine need to anchor and be in the body and be in my feet and be in the earth and let that be my support for others, to anchor them in their bodies so that they connect to their beauty and wisdom and divinity.
mm. Oh, I love that. Yes, and a fellow yogi. Yeah. So, I think the part of what you're sharing here, this idea that how do we bring spirit into our everyday life, right? And how do we, I think, because I know for myself, I have practitioners and I like the Rolfing thing. I had a friend who used to go to Rolfing right before work, and we would literally have our coffee and our breakfast together at his desk. And he'd be like, yes, I spent the morning crying in pain because the Rolfing was so intense. Like that, I've never experienced it. It's really like it's deep tissue to like the 10th degree, right? Goes really in.
Not necessarily, which is really interesting because I think that like when I first started doing body work was also when Rolfing was probably at its most extreme, right? But I was also doing um So body work was intense. Yoga, I mean, this was when people were standing on you and pushing you over, which nobody does that anymore. So it's the same in body work. It's like all the stuff that we were trying to do of this, the extreme
Mhm,
yoga and
mhm,
the extreme body work has all been toned down because people just don't want that anymore, or
mm,
it's actually
mm.
created a lot of damage in the body.
Well,
So
that's interesting that you say that because I
it's
remember when I was taking my yoga teacher's training 25 years ago, we were taught pretty hands-on techniques for spotting people, right? Yoga assisting. And as this with naturally, I started to steer further and further away from so much physical engagement, partially because of my own injury from the physical engagement to begin with. Like I remember I literally, like, I don't know that many people know this. I've gotten kicked in the eye during spotting people for handstand. I've gotten my wrist hurt spotting people getting into postures. Like there it's I don't think people realize, like, it's a contact sport, and I find it really interesting what you said, because it seems to me that whilst, yes, that's sort of like, let's sit down on this person and push more, some people really still like that. But this movement into less spotting and more allowing definitely feels like there's an energetic movement into more of the feminine than the masculine, right? It's so interesting. I'm surprised. I'm really happy to hear that in a way, because this is what these conversations are for. Because for so long I thought, like, oh my God, I'm not doing my job. I'm not spotting enough. Blah, 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 blah. But it's good to hear that other people are not spotting as much either.
yeah, I think it really started to shift. I mean, I've seen some crazy stuff in classes. Um, and I've been injured and I have injured others. And that's also when I started
Mm,
to back off. But I also started having teachers who were more sensitive, right? And I am a sensitive, but I've always tried to fit in with the group.
mhm, mhm, mhm.
And I had one teacher and she would do adjustments. She would put a finger, like a finger on where she thought the energy wasn't moving or wasn't supported, just one little finger and barely touch me.
Yeah,
And it was so amazing because I was like, "Ooh." Like
yeah.
I would respond because it was almost like she was giving me permission to find my own alignment,
Oh, I love it.
find
Yes.
my own integration. And it was
Yeah.
so empowering as opposed to somebody just pushing on me. And I'm like, well, then I'm doing it wrong and I don't know how to get there myself. And like this whole, mishigas starts. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, it really is just there's a little leak here. I'm just
Totally.
bringing a little awareness to this spot. And when you're aware of it, how does it shift your awareness of yourself? It's like, oh,
Well, and it's also really speaks to the wisdom of the body. Like, our
yeah.
body has wisdom. And sometimes it's simply about directing the energy. We have magnetism to us, right? So sometimes, I mean, it's like the movement of network spinal analysis versus traditional chiropractic. I remember when I for years I had an injured neck and shoulder, a pinched nerve in my neck and shoulder for like 8 months. And I literally could not turn my head more than like 3 degrees. And all of my yoga postures had to be done with no arms. Like, it was really a very hard, humbling time for me. We as you know, as a yogi, we learn from our injuries. And it also gives us more sensitivity to other people coming in with injuries and an understanding of the body in a very different way. And I remember going to the chiropractor, and the chiropractor was amazing. Like, I was just like all about chiropractic. And at one point, believe it or not, little known fact, when I was in high school, I thought about going into chiropractic, and my father thought it was a quack. My father was like, "Oh, no, no." Meanwhile, my dad was the first in the family to go to a chiropractor religiously and be like, "This is the best thing since sliced bread." So funny. Anyway, I remember one of my students came in, and I did some work on them because I work as a integrative positional therapist. So I works a lot about on muscle energy technique and strain and counter strain in the muscles. And I had done something, I guess I did something with her neck and shoulders during Shavasana. And she came up to me afterwards. She goes, I love this. It was so great. I can't believe I have no more pain. You really should see my friend. And she was also a practitioner, but she lived in like the Hamptons and I lived in New Jersey. So she said, go see my friend Andy. He's amazing, blah, blah, blah. Long story short, I've been seeing him for years now. And I remember the first time I walked in there, I knew immediately that this was an energetic healing experience, not just a snap, crackle, pop, as I like to call it. And his adjustments, have you ever had an NSA session?
Yeah.
Right? His adjustments were literally like this. And I mean, those of you out there might think I'm a little cray cray if you haven't done this. The adjustment, this is chiropractic, was like this. That was like, and I'm just like, what the heck is going on here? I could not believe how good I felt afterwards. And it really was. And even he said, I'm not going to adjust all the pieces. I adjust certain spots and then we trust that the body will find its way. And it worked every time.
So funny. I want to know who you saw. What was his name?
His name is uh Andrew Witt, Dr. John Andrew Witt.
Okay, no, not because I know another Andrew, network chiropractor. I was like, is that? No, that's great.
And she has since passed. She had breast cancer and died. She was actually partners with one of my students, and that was a really heartbreaking time. But her name was Deborah. Thinking of you, Deborah. Hope you hear us up there.
Mm.
And Andrew's just great, and it's I know I always call him Dr. Witt, but like his name is everyone else calls him Andy. I don't know why. I just feel like I want to give this man the respect that he deserves. He's a traditionally trained chiropractor who now does an network spinal analysis. It's great.
Yeah,
Great. But
yeah.
it does speak to the wisdom of the body. Now I want to talk a little bit about that too because I know that you often work with folks that have trauma, some sort of trauma living in their body, right? So let's talk a little bit about that. How does that um what do you find shows up for folks when they've had like what happens with the physical body when something emotional like that happens? Let's talk about that because that's a juicy conversation we can have.
Yeah. Well, so I think people come to me because they're in pain, right? They come because um whatever's going on in their body, they're in pain in their body. And I think even when I was younger, people would just start talking about what was going on for them. And I've heard lots of stories, but I think that one, there was just a sense of safety, of being held, but I do think that our symptoms, and I'll just share as somebody that I saw last week, that our symptoms are really, um, it's like when you're talking about the chiropractic, it's like the just bringing the awareness to it so it can move. I think that our symptoms are really the body's way of saying there's something that needs to come to surface, to be felt, to be processed, to be
Hmm.
acknowledged, that it's
Hmm.
been stuck or unprocessed, undigested, even unconscious, that needs to come up. And so I've had people share just things and, the constant, I know I've never said this to anybody else. I've never said this to anybody else, or things that they weren't even really aware of. And it's been a lot of stuff. It's been abuse in marriages. I've had people leave their marriages after the sessions. I've had- but I think it's just the body's way of saying, I need you to tune in. Like you're just
Hmm.
moving through life and not addressing what needs to come to surface. I had a man come in last week, could barely walk, could barely sit,
Mm.
hasn't been able to work, and a lot of fear because he can't work. And really what it came to was just deep, deep grief. He lost his wife of 35 years. He's just deeply, deeply grieving. I mean, I think he sobbed most of the time, but it was just this, it's in his body so intently. And he's an extreme case, but it's what I see often
Mhm.
is that people come in and they think it's the shoulder, they think it's the neck, it's the ankle, it's the lower back, and it tends to be this kind of whole
Yeah.
story that comes to surface.
I've noticed that too. Um, and I think this is inherent in the kind of work that you and I both do, right?
Mhm,
And especially coming from the yoga field, if we can talk even just about that. Like I know what part of what attracted me to yoga to begin with was that I just got it. Like I got that my physical body is a container holding all the other things. And the stuff that shows up physically, and I often say this to my clients and my students, it's if it's showing up physically, that's the last place it shows up. Like it's almost, yeah, that's like our outer shell because we've got the spiritual shell, we've got the mental emotional shell, and then we've got the physical container around all of that. And if stuff is showing up, it's often as a result of something underlying that we haven't addressed, as you said, right? So how do we go in there gently, because it's easier for us to touch and feel like, oh, my shoulder hurts or my knee hurts. N- and like, I'll use me as an example. Like, my knee hurts. I've had knee injury since high school. I did one semester of cheerleading and my knees have never been the same. And I danced all through high school and college. So, that's part of it. There's a physicality of it. But now I'm not doing all those things. And my knees work pretty well, but then every now and again, I'm like, now is that an old injury? Or is that also like, what's the emotion behind it? And I can
mhm,
tell you that when I've done emotional work and literally have been like, all right, knee, tell me what's going on, the answer I get is really crazy. And people listening and watching might be like, you're talking to your knee. I'm like, yes, because your body has wisdom and your knee will tell, like my knee, when I've spoken to it in all transparency, has said, it's afraid to move forward.
mhm,
It doesn't like being rushed to walk at other people's pace, which is that speaks realms, right? It speaks
mhm,
so deeply towards I don't want to walk at to the beat of someone else's drum.
mhm.
And that in and of itself may not heal completely, but definitely improves it, right? Because then you've made some sort of open connection. What do you think about that? Does that
Yeah, I
resonate for
love that.
you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that our body is consciousness, right? It's a different flavor of consciousness than our mind and our heart, but it's it is still it is still consciousness. So yeah, it has a lot to say. And I've had moments of that too. I remember when I also had an injury in my neck where I couldn't lift my arms. And so yes, yoga on the floor without arms for a couple of years was what happened, but it changed one, how I listened to body, how I listened to other people, how I moved, how I taught. Um, it changed a lot. It actually anchored me in my body more than I had been,
Mm,
right? I feel like that each injury I went through anchored me more in my body, that I had spent most of my life completely kind of dysregulated and halfway out of my body, or mostly out of my body, just kind of hovering around, visiting,
yeah. Did you
visiting once in a while.
Did you have that similar situation? Like, I remember when I first got on the formal yoga mat, and I always say that because I'd actually been practicing yoga for most of my life, probably since at least I was 12 years old. And I didn't know it was yoga. And then I had been dancing all through high school and college and doing yoga to warm ups. My warm ups were yoga. Like I was doing yoga and never even realized it was just a natural thing, right? We're all born yogis, at least that's what I believe. And use it or lose it. So when I had kind of stopped and then when I got back on the mat, I noticed immediately, first I felt like I had come home, and
Mm,
second I realized what was going on. The reason I went to yoga is because I was really really stressed and started having physical ailments, and my cousin was the one that said you should get to yoga, it's really going to help you. And what was happening was I wasn't in my body, right? You just said like this idea, you'd say, as an embodiment coach, like I was walking through the world in my head attached to something, but I really wasn't feeling in there. So there was this like, I can just use this and follow what I'm being told and da 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 da. But there was this whole body brain that I wasn't paying attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that our culture, there has been a big investment in especially women not being connected to their bodies. So some of it isn't our doing. Some of it is just that we weren't given permission,
Mm,
right? That our bodies are, you know, that men do horrible things because of our bodies, right? So our bodies need to be shamed or whatever, whatever it is.
yeah.
Um, that the church has taught us not to touch ourselves or acknowledge ourselves or have pleasure in ourselves. And like that has carried on for a very long time. And I do think that we've retreated into this very kind of hyper intellectualized, hyper mental way of moving in the world. And that part of these practices is really to get us to be in the full experience of ourselves, right? And that those are more um I don't want to say uh, I don't want to say indigenous, but they're just closer to the earth,
Hmm.
right? Really connecting you to more of, right, if you're in your body and you're feeling what's happening in your body and you notice how you feel around other people or what you eat impacts you, or maybe even noticing, the environment and how um right, just noticing the things around you and how it impacts your body, or that you feel grief, or that you feel empathy or concern or frustration or anger, right? That it's not just in our head, it's really in our body. And that
Hmm.
need to move and express and create and um, live in it, right? Rather than being slightly removed from it.
Yeah, I think
Feel
yeah. I completely agree. And I think that there's a sense that if we feel it, we won't be able to get out of it. I think that there is often I've heard from clients and participants in programs that I facilitate, they're afraid to feel the emotion because what happens then? Right? And you hear it a lot in recovery rooms, right? If I acknowledge in a 12-step program, like if I acknowledge when people are working their fourth step, if I acknowledge my defects and then I ask higher power to remove my defects, who am I? Who am I? I've used these to define me. And I think a lot of people get attached so deeply to the story of the pain, right? The pain, that the physical pain, whatever the story is that's being masked by the pain, because the pain is the what we're seeing, but underneath it, it's hurt, it's fear, it's sadness, it's grief, it's shame, it's guilt, it's all those emotions. We're afraid to feel them because we think we'll die if we feel those feelings. And that's actually not what happens, right?
No, and it's actually pervasive. What you said is just so pervasive in our world that everyone is so afraid. And that we create these, um, it's almost like there's this collective, right, holding on to a story,
Mhm.
just to protect our individual stories. But yeah, I mean, I do think that, I love, this is why I love Tara Brach and her work, that recognize, allow, investigate, and nourish. Just this whole idea of that if you let it move through you, it will move through you, right? If we interrupt it with our thinking brain and we justify it or we stop it, that it becomes undigested and it just loops. It's like
Repeat that again. Will you repeat that again for me? The steps?
which part? The
Just
brain?
the Tara Brach stuff that she says, the feel.
It's like recognize the emotion,
Mhm.
recognize it, allow it, invite it in, or not, just be with what's happening. Um, a little investigation, but not to stop it.
Mhm.
Just like, and what else is there? And what
Right.
else, right?
Right.
Just to allow it to move through and then
So
to nourish. to nourish.
Yeah.
And
So
it's
the
almost like mothering, right? It's like your child would come to you completely screaming, yelling, and you hold them, right? And you just to let them cry.
yeah.
And then maybe, is there more? Is there more?
Yeah, and I mean, first, there's so many things that I wanna say. First, so Tara Brock, if I am not mistaken, is partners with one of my teachers, my meditation teacher, Sudhir. Sudhir Jonathan Faust, I think they're partners, which is really interesting because I met Sudhir through Kripalu because I'm a trained Kripalu yoga teacher, and, um, the, uh the methodology that we teach is breathe, relax, feel, watch, and allow.
Mm.
So it's very much the similar along the same lines of like relax and feel, right? The healing happens through the allowance and the awareness. It's not about having to change it or make it different. That comes later. That the choice comes later, but if you're blocked by this backup of emotion, that's all you're going to be aware of. That's all that's going to there's no more space for anything else. And I think that that's what happens is we kind of explode like these capped champagne bottles.
Yes.
There's so much stuff built up in us, we don't know where else to go. So we either explode or we implode.
Yep.
Um, and this idea of, I feel like I just talked about this on the last conversation that I had, but there's this idea of riding the wave. Who was I? I was just, I think we just talked about this in the last conversation, like riding the wave. An incident happens, sensation builds, and we have the choice to ride the wave and let ourselves feel it fully, and then integration can happen, and then we have choice,
Yeah.
right? We have awareness and choice. Most people, incident happens, the crest rides, and we jump off the wave with addiction, with over exercising, with TV, with shopping, you name it, we do it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think in what I've learned in the energy awareness part is that most of us don't feel safe enough, that we don't feel innately supported or nourished enough or resourced enough or whatever word you want to use um, to feel it. And I think
True.
that's part of the disruption is that there's an innate kind of lack of safety in the system. And some of that is just old nervous system trauma. Sometimes it's older than we can even understand, right?
Hmm.
Pre-verbal. And
Yep.
anything before 7 is really kind of vague.
Hmm. Well, and it's interesting that you say that too, because I think that there's an added layer that is problematic, and that's one of isolation. That's one
Mm.
of think this idea that showing that we have emotion that many might consider weak is dangerous, as
Mhm.
opposed to finding trusted servants, trusted people, coaches, therapists, practitioners who can help guide you and help create that safe container for you to feel and heal. And I
Mm.
think, I mean, I feel like folks that try to do it by themselves, it's much harder. It is
Much.
much harder to give yourself permission in the space because most of us don't give ourselves the permission. If we did, we wouldn't be in these predicaments.
No.
I mean,
No.
how many people out there don't give themselves permission to rest? We were just talking about this in another class recently. We think rest is a reward.
It's not. It's a necessity.
Sleep is not a reward, it's a necessity.
Right.
Self-care is not a reward, it's a requirement. Like, and those things, for years I've watched this, and I'm sure you have too. As a yogi, we understand like on the mat, that's how I handle, that's where I take care of me. That was for a very long time my yoga, meditation, and my cushion, right? Like my yoga mat and my meditation cushion. Those were the places where I checked in so that I could not have to check out in my life.
Yeah.
And so many folks are skipping that step.
Right. And then we start to bridge. Like we feel safe enough within ourselves to hold, right, to be able to feel those feelings, but we do definitely I mean, that's why people traditionally lived in community. I mean, many cultures did not live the way we live now, where people are separated, isolated,
Mhm.
and not able to rely on each other, right? Certain cultures, it's, you don't ask for anything, like pick your own, pick yourself up.
Yeah.
Like there is a lot of that. And so, yeah, I agree that support is really, really helpful. And
So it's essential. It's essential. We're wired for connection.
we are, and we do, and there are ways that we do need to tend to ourselves as well as let other people tend, because we are innately very, I mean, just like you said, we're intense with ourselves. I mean, how much of this, I mean, there's also people say to me when they don't want to, they have a hard time meditating because they can't handle the amount of negativity that's in their mind. Right, but we're operating off of that negativity. And it's very similar with meditation in that if we can understand what the tapes are in our head. I mean, I remember once sitting in meditation and I said out loud, I don't believe that shit. I saw this loop in my head and I was like, that is not true. Like, I can't believe I've been thinking that for so many years.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating to have, like, have you ever done silent retreat? Because,
Oh,
like,
yeah.
the thoughts that come up in your brain, and I think it was Swami Kripalu who said, like, if you do if oh, no, maybe it wasn't Swami Kripalu, but anyway, the expression is, "Before you speak, think if it's going to improve the silence."
Right. But also, like, how do we tend to that? How do we tend to all those? Because there's also this that some of those voices aren't even ours.
Oh, many of them are not.
Yeah,
Trying
and
to
they're
hear
not
your
really
own voice.
they're not really the truth, like the quiet voice. Like, we learn that in meditation and in yoga is like the quiet voice, that soft voice.
The intuition.
Yep, the one that we ignore a lot because it's too quiet, whereas the other loud, the judgy and the you can't and the what if and
And
the
yeah, and
you
those aren't our
should and
those aren't our voices. That's the crazy part.
no,
If we would stop and think a little bit about what are the tapes playing,
mhm,
physically, mentally, emotionally, what are the tapes that are playing? The majority of the tapes that are in our collection do not belong to us.
no, they don't.
They're conditioned, they're indoctrinated, they were put upon us, and they're not accurate.
Right, or even misinterpretations.
Yes, because as children, we interpret things and maybe it was just how we saw it through the lens that we were given. And, with the new filter, some new tapes and a new filtration system and some new glasses, you're good to go. You're brand new. It's a new life.
It is a new life. It it does take a while to move through some of this. I
Oh, yeah.
mean, yeah, yeah.
I mean, here we are. I've been on this road for a while. I'm
Why we
still
get
growing and
are
learning,
we get wiser as we get older maybe sometimes?
but we're still growing and learning. And I think that the most important piece is to take that first step.
Yeah,
Right? I always think about that scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark. I don't remember which one it is, but he's standing at the edge of the cliff and there's a map in front of him and he's got to go to the other mountain and there's no way to get there. And literally he has to trust and take that first step. And when he does that, the bridge starts to build itself as he takes one step, one
mhm,
step, one step until he gets across this crevasse. And I think that there's this fear of trusting someone else, but often it's about trusting yourself. Like, because we've so tried to get the results that we want, whatever that is, through an old filtration and conditioning system. Like, well, of course it's not going to happen when, if you've got a tape playing going, you're not good enough, nothing you do is ever going to work, and you're trying to make efforts towards something that you really desire, whether that's in your physical body, whether that's in your mind, whether that's in your emotions, whatever it is, whether it's in your relationship or your career, if you've got those negative tapes going, how far do you think you're going to get?
Yeah.
You're not going to go very far because there's a self saboteur going, that's never going to happen. That's never going to happen. And so we create what we think about.
Yeah. And again, sometimes it's not even our thought, right? I mean, I think what I'm really seeing is that the collective and how immature, right, unrefined, and um um what's the word? It's like the collective as a whole. It's almost like middle school, middle school, but weirder. It's like there's not a lot of evolution on the when we put everybody together, right? Because we don't know how to support each other anymore. We don't. There's a lot of comparison, competition, and fear and lack and neglect that we're all sorting through. And so there is that. How do we find the communities or the people that support us to move beyond that, to move beyond those voices of, well, she's going to do, and they're going to do, and who do you think you are, and all those kind of young immature voices that aren't helpful, right?
Mm,
That are floating around our space. And so I do get when the masters say it's like, work on your work on this, create peace in here, pray out there, like bring this evolution out
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
so that we can influence the collective. Like, I just saw that picture and I was like, oh yeah, that's why it's so important to pray globally, right? To pray collectively.
Yeah. Well, I totally agree with that. And what you just said reminded me of when I was taking my teacher's training. The thing that stuck to me most out of the yamas and the niyamas, and those watching, if you don't know what that is, it's kind of like the 10 commandments of yoga. It's the do's and don'ts, what to do and what not to do. And one of the major tenets of yoga is to practice what we call svadhyaya, which is self-study. And
Mhm.
for me, that just resonated. I was like, I can dive more into that. I got to dive into that. It was like first tenet of yoga is nonviolence, ahimsa, nonviolence towards others, but also towards yourself,
Towards
um,
anyone,
towards
right?
anybody. Correct. But the self-study part, I
Mhm.
that's if someone would ask me what was the most impactful thing in this moment, in the top 5 most impactful things of my yogic journey would be that
Mm.
tenet of yoga, because knowing myself more, having greater self-awareness gave me greater joy. It empowered me because I was able to it was through that I was able to do all the other things, all make all the other choices, knowing myself, understanding what's the feelings in the body, what are the thoughts, where are they coming from, getting curious, getting people that I trusted to guide me, not trying to swim through that sea of craziness all by myself was like a really big deal. Mentors and coaches and um, healing practitioners. Uh, and I think to your point, when we have that, when we understand that who we are, we're a pebble in this ocean, right? And everything that we do creates a ripple effect, even if we don't realize it. Every action creates a ripple effect. And so, this idea that like it's hard in this collective, I think it's because we don't know ourselves. We
Mhm.
don't know ourselves. We define ourselves based on comparison to others instead of just knowing who we are. And it took me years. I mean, this what we're doing right now is a testament for me. It's like it took me years to feel like I was enough, that I had something that might help somebody else, that I might be able to say something that could impact somebody or change someone's life or make someone not feel so alone the way I did for so many years.
Mhm.
But if we're not willing to know ourselves, how can we connect with other people?
Yeah.
This just took a real heavy turn.
Good, and then it comes back to the safety part,
Yeah.
right, right, because some of us don't feel safe within ourselves,
So
and
how do we
that's
create safety in ourselves?
wow, and that's hard. I mean, I have seen people who are extremely unsafe in their own body, and sometimes that's abuse and extreme abuse, and that just takes a lot longer and a lot more, um, support. But I think it's I do, I think it's support. I mean, I think that, like, I know I feel different when I'm in community. And yes, community can be complicated. Right? There's opinions, and we get back on the mental plane of, I know you, I know more than you, or I'm right, you're right. The personality or the ego. But when we can connect heart to heart, when we can actually allow ourselves to support another and be supported in that way, that's very, I guess, safe because it's you're allowed to be who you are, then it does allow you to get to know yourself. I think there is a lot of posturing in our world. There is a lot of competition. There is a lot of defending and, otherness. And I think that's just innate in us, that kind of you're different than me and therefore you're scary,
Mm,
right? That it does create a huge influence, and that, finding pockets of places where we feel safe.
mhm.
And they could be in the weirdest places. I mean, I have been in yoga studios that didn't feel safe.
Me too.
And I have been
Yeah.
in communities that felt extremely safe.
Mhm. Yeah, what came to mind when you were saying that was this, the old message of like, don't talk to strangers. Don't talk to strangers.
Mhm.
And if we're still operating, if we're still running that tape as adults, that's really hard. Don't talk to strangers. Everyone's strange. Everyone's not me. And then it's very isolating. That was really hard for me because I was taught don't talk to strangers. Don't trust anyone who's not your family. Like, that's really hard. Like, how do you socialize with people? And how do you have an authentic relationship with anybody?
Outside of your
Really? So like I think I think that some of these things are like you said, they're from our childhood that we're not young enough, we're not old our brain we're not old enough to like be able to decipher like, oh, they just mean like they're just trying to keep me safe. Right? These
No.
are just really innocent people who love me, who are just trying to keep me safe. But then that becomes like this core, belief of like nobody's trustworthy. So then you're isolated and then it's hard to be in community. And we need that connection. So,
And really learning how to, and it's interesting to think about, because my dad left, and I don't know if he was around a lot. He was very busy. And so I know there wasn't a lot of, you know, attachment between the two of us,
mm,
or bonding. And my mom, she was very kind of hands-on and very um connected, but I also had a brother who was disabled. And so there was a lot of anxiety. And again, it's not that she was being overtly hurtful, but she lived in a state of anxiety, which very much influenced my body and my way of processing my own emotions. And it's just interesting, or her kind of bouts of depression and how I would internalize those. And again, it's more for me to understand myself, but also other people, how even seemingly small things have an influence, right? And maybe another child would have perceived it differently, but um, that's how I perceived it. And I
mm.
am very sensitive, right? And it's my sensitivity to others. Does that come from being sensitive to her, or was that innate? Who knows? But it is my job now.
Well, and that's the
So
other
it's worked
thing,
out.
right? Like, I think that's such an interesting thing. It's like these experiences that we have make us who we are.
They do.
They make
And
us who we are, and so you can't say, "Oh, it happened." Some of it will feel like, "Oh, it happened to me," and that, that victimization mentality, the victim mentality, but ultimately they happen for us to become the person that we're here to be.
yeah,
And that's
and it's
sometimes hard to
both.
swallow. That's hard to like
Yeah.
take.
Well, I think it's both, and I have such a hard time with that word, but
Which one?
the victim word. I think more again, it's more because there's such a judgment around it, and I think that's just part of our culture. Because I think that at some points we're all victims to something,
Mhm.
right? That we are all, um there is a lot of training that we go through and conditioning, and I would say that is part of what we're victim to, right? Getting out from under that. So it is part of our journey. And there is that kind of moving through the different, like moving into more ownership over who we are. But, sometimes I think I have more ownership who I am. And then and then I continue to find out that I don't, I'm still afraid to speak up. And I'm still afraid to speak up to authority figures. And,
Mhm.
I still freak out when the IRS sends me a letter and giving me really some intense direction, like that I still shrink.
Mhm.
And I think it's just
Same
giving,
sister, just so you know, you're not alone.
right, but having
Yeah.
permission, right, that place of, um, it's a place also of a child, right? And we spend a lot of our time completely dependent on others. And yes, victim to their depression, anxiety, immaturity, addiction, whatever. And so it's part of us. And how do we hold that? I mean, maybe that's part of what our wound is that we don't really give ourselves permission to feel that because our society is telling us just to get over it, just to pull your panties up and pull your bootstraps up and just
Yeah.
keep going because
Get over it, suck it up.
you're a
Literally
failure.
suck up the feel, like, it's literally suck it up or pipe down or like, you know, it's literally about stuffing it and holding it in.
Isn't it? Yes,
No wonder
absolutely.
people no wonder people are angry and depressed and anxious, like, because 'cause we're not giving ourselves the space. Many people are not giving themselves the space to process that, to feel that, to heal that, to integrate that.
Yeah,
And that's why I'm grateful for the work that we both do, because we give people that space. We provide that space, that safe container for people to really be just who they are, not make it wrong.
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
cool. Such a gift to do the work that we do, such a gift to know you, to have met you in community like this. Our lives don't happen in a vacuum, and I think I feel really blessed because I feel like over the course of the last almost 2 years I've I've been I've become connected to powerful beings like yourself. So I'm so grateful. So grateful. I could
Yeah.
talk to you for about like another billion years because I'm
I
sure
know.
we can talk about so much more. Um,
But we
but
should probably
huh?
but 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 we have to give them bite-sized pieces of us or it's just too much.
It's too much otherwise. I know. So, I wanna before we hop off, I want you to share with everybody, um, this upcoming so those of you watching this, whenever you're watching this, this was filmed in December of 2023. So the work that we're gonna be sharing with you here in the links below, we'll post some links, in the description in the comments. Feel free to tag Padma or myself so that if you have questions or you wanna talk about it further, um, but Padma, tell us about this upcoming 21-day challenge that you have coming up in 2024. I'm really excited for you to share that with everybody.
So, it starts on January 1st, and it's a 21-day body reset. It's called a quantum body reset, right? So, small pieces, right? Small bits of um, I guess, support for 21 days, just to really have a different kind of experience in our body, right? And I don't want to give too much, too fast, too soon, so that we can maybe integrate it into moving forward, right? That it becomes more of a habit and a practice, right? I'm trying to steer away from that. I'm just going to go in and whip my body into shape and then fail or not be able to maintain it. And so we will have movement and meditation and weekly check-ins and a little bit of nervous system training, sleep training. And I'm going to pull in some other people just to bring in some wisdom, right? Little bits of support so that we have a container to start this year nourished, rested, supported,
Mm.
vibrant,
That makes
ease.
me really happy. I feel like it's a big hug. Yay. Now, is it going to happen in a private space? Is it a private Zoom? Is it on a private group? How are you running it?
Private group. Yeah, so it'll mostly happen in there and in Zoom. Some of it will be Zoom, some of it will be recorded and then put in Zoom. I'm trying to find a schedule that's hard because different time zones, but finding at least a consistent schedule. The movement is daily, and so some of it will be at a consistent time with some variations in time for other time zones.
Got it. Got it. Got it. And if people can't attend a specific day, will it be posted in the private Facebook group?
Mhm.
Awesome. And it's a 21-day challenge. It starts January 1st. We will put that's 2024 for those of you watching the replay. Um so we will put the link. Padma will give me a link and we'll put that in there so y'all can get more information about that. And super excited about that. That would a great way to start the year
Super
with sort
exciting.
of like a smooth transition into a new year rather than the traditional like let's do it. Because I mean, and we could go into this, this could be an entirely new episode on why resolutions don't work for us. I think that yeah,
Right.
I have many opinions about New Year's resolutions and the ineffectiveness of that. I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only person that years and years and years went by and I every year would write down the same resolutions and every New Year's Eve I'd be like, "Well, none of those happened. Let's write them again." So, what a wonderful opportunity to
Yeah, and I
create
found, and it's
something
kind of
different.
funny to do it. I actually wanted to do it in December, and I was like, people are so distracted in December, right? There's just so much happening, right? The end of school, holidays, there's just a lot happening. So January, I also really love January. We are almost at the solstice, right? It's the our dark, right? Our internal time. And
A
so that's
week
why I
away from
wanted.
solstice, right? A week away? Just
Yeah,
about?
and I want it to be gentle because we are still in this cocoon of winter, right? Or
Mhm.
cocoon, right? Depending on what hemisphere you're so southern or northern. But like in one of my teachers calls the solstice, the summer solstice, the height, the pause at the top of the inhale, and winter solstice, the pause at the bottom of the exhale. So we're in that kind of the emptiness, the cocoon, the rest,
Yeah.
dark, the soil.
Yeah, where we get to plant all the seeds.
Yeah, well, it's just sitting in that how do I feel in my body and can I nourish my body? And what does that feel like to feel nourished? Right? Because most of us don't always know. Right?
Well,
We're
and
always
most people aren't really nourishing themselves. We can
right.
talk about the physical nourishment, but like, and I have this conversation on the regular. The actual nourishment, what are you consuming? Like the
Yeah.
actual like what are the foods we're eating that are contributing and exacerbating things like seasonal depression, things like obesity, or even just a couple extra pounds that are making you feel uncomfortable. Like what are the things, like our mindset is directly affected to that, not
It's
just the seasons but also what we're doing on a regular basis. So I'm really excited that you're offering this. Super cool. We will put that in the chat. Anything, any other last words before we go?
no, I just adore you and I adore our conversations and it's just really lovely. One, I love our backgrounds. We have these yoga backgrounds. We have the East Coast background. We have kind of Latin and not Latin
Yeah.
cultural joining in our bodies, and I love that.
I know, me too. It's this rare gift. Yeah, for those of you who don't
Curly and the curly hair.
curly red hair, I know there's like a lot of things. There's a lot of things. I so enjoy your company and I'm so grateful for you taking the time out of your busy, busy schedule to come up here and share your wisdom and your brilliance with everybody. Love you. Mwah. Thank you everybody for listening, for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.